Can everybody hear me all right there? Is that all right?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm ready to go with my super. Okay. Well, hello. I'm here today to give you an overview of conflicts of interest in vaccination policy, including examining the influence of powerful individuals such as Bill Gates and Rupert Murdoch, and the network of conflicted academics involved in industry-funded vaccine trials, who are also influencing vaccination policy, particularly Terry Nolan, the former chair of the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunization, ATAGI, and Robert Bowie, the head of clinical research at the National Centre for Immunization Research and Surveillance. The public is largely unaware of the wide web of conflicts of interest impacting on taxpayer-funded vaccination policy. This is a complicated subject which needs detailed analysis, but I hope this information provided here today provides a springboard to think about this. This presentation and slides will soon be available on the conference website and Facebook, and also on my website, OVER-VACCINATION.net. So I should explain, why am I involved in this project? I'm an independent citizen. I've no vested interests apart from making our federal and state governments accountable for mandated vaccination policies. I've been investigating this area for the past 10 years. I became interested in vaccination when one of my dogs became very ill after vaccination and was put down. I subsequently discovered that over-vaccination of companion animals is very controversial, but most pet owners were being misled by their vets about this. I started investigating and challenging the Australian Veterinary Association and the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority about this issue, along with another pet owner, B. Mize. Choice Consumer magazine reported on over-vaccination of pets in 2010. Other mainstream media also reported on vaccination of pets. Things have changed a lot since then, and now the media generally won't touch anything critical of vaccination. I was particularly interested that dog and cat vaccination guidelines were warning to decrease vaccination of pets to minimise the risk of adverse reactions to vaccines, and admitting that vaccine-associated adverse events were grossly underreported. This set me thinking about comparisons with human vaccination, where vaccination is going through the roof, and effective vaccine safety surveillance is not happening. In Australia, the vaccination schedule for children is growing out of sight, and adults are increasingly in the frame for more and more vaccines. The community is not consulted about adding vaccines to the taxpayer-funded schedule. There are at least 46 doses of vaccines on the national schedule for children now. I suggest children are being over-vaccinated with this growing amount of vaccine products and revaccinations. Federal and state government no jab, no pay and no play laws are forcing the community to be compliant to the vaccination schedule. Parents aren't allowed to consider the risks and benefits of each individual vaccine. In this coercive environment, doctors cannot perform their ethical duty and obtain valid informed consent before each vaccination. This also raises the question whether doctors can be relied upon to acknowledge and report adverse events after vaccination. There are problems emerging now with vaccines, for example, the failing pertussis whooping cough vaccine, and also issues with measles, mumps, HPV, and annual flu vaccinations and others. We have to question repeated revaccinations throughout life. What are the long-term consequences? So, how does a vaccine product get on the taxpayer-funded schedule? Vaccine manufacturers submit their vaccine products for assessment and registration by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA. The TGA uses manufacturer-supplied data for this process. The TGA is funded by industry for this service, which means it has a conflict of interest. The Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, ATAGI, recommends vaccine products for the taxpayer-funded national schedule. Many members of ATAGI also work on industry-funded vaccine trials, which means they have a conflict of interest. Terry Nolan was chair of ATAGI for the period 2005 to 2014, and the schedule grew substantially during his tenure. Terry Nolan remains very influential on vaccination policy, both in Australia and internationally, as I will demonstrate later in this presentation. The Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, the PBAC, has the final say on whether vaccine products will be added to the taxpayer-funded schedule. While the PBAC may initially reject vaccine products, the vaccine manufacturers often persist until they get their product on the schedule. An example to watch at the moment is the persistent campaign for the GlaxoSmithKline Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine, which has already been rejected 3 times by the PBAC. If this vaccine gets on the schedule, this will mean another 4 doses of aluminium adjuvanted vaccines for babies. As this audience probably knows, there are concerns about the increasing use of aluminium adjuvanted vaccines. Meningococcal B only very rarely has serious consequences, so mass vaccination with this vaccine product is highly questionable. I'll talk more about the Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine later. As noted in the previous slide, the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, ATAGI, recommends vaccine products for the taxpayer-funded schedule, and many of its members work on industry-funded vaccine trials. That is, they have conflicts of interest. Under Terry Nolan's chairmanship of ATAGI from 2005 to 2014, annual vaccine expenditure in Australia was trending towards $450 million in 2015-16, up from $10 million per annum in the mid-1970s. An article published in the Australian Doctor in November 2005 titled "We'll Be Fast, New Vax Boss" reports the new head of the federal government's revised vaccine advisory group, Professor Terry Nolan, will prioritise timely responses to new vaccines and industry developments. It appears Terry Nolan created ATAGI as a pipeline for industry. During Terry Nolan's tenure at ATAGI, there was reluctance to make public the membership of this group and their potential conflicts of interest. Judy Weilerman and I have sought to access this information. For example, I wrote to then Health Minister Nicola Roxon on this matter in November 2011, and then to then Prime Minister Tony Abbott in January 2015. Only in recent years has inadequate conflict of interest information from members of ATAGI become publicly accessible, and there is still no historical information about previous members, such as former ATAGI chair Terry Nolan. Other organisations and conflicted academics are part of the wide web of influence on vaccination policy. For example, the Murdochs Children's Research Institute is involved in vaccination research. This institute was founded by Rupert Murdoch's mother, Dame Elizabeth Murdoch, and continues to be supported by the Murdoch family. The former chair of ATAGI, Terry Nolan, is now a group leader in vaccination and immunisation research with this Murdoch Institute, with involvement in projects funded by GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Novartis, Sanofi Pasteur and Novavax. He's been involved in studies regarding the Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine. Another organisation influential on vaccination policy is the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance. The director of the NCIRS also holds an influential ex officio position on ATAGI. While the NCIRS claims to provide independent expert advice on vaccination, the former director, Peter McIntyre, was associated with industry-sponsored vaccine research. The head of NCIRS clinical research, Robert Bowie, is also involved in industry-sponsored research. Robert Bowie is also a director and scientific advisory member of the Immunization Coalition, an industry organisation which is sponsored and supported by GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, CSL companies Seqirus, Sanofi Pasteur, Roche and others, including Google. Robert Bowie is also the medical advisor for Meningococcal Australia, a patient organisation campaigning for taxpayer-funded meningococcal B vaccination, which is funded by meningococcal B vaccine manufacturers GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer. Robert Bowie is often cited in the media supporting vaccine products, using his university affiliation, but his conflicts of interest via the vaccine industry are seldom publicly disclosed. Another organisation impacting on vaccination policy is the Australian Academy of Science, with its publication, The Science of Immunisation, Questions and Answers, which was funded by the Australian Government Department of Health. Along with others such as Peter McIntyre of the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance, and Ian Fraser, a co-inventor of the HPV vaccines, Terry Nolan was a member of the working party for this publication. Starting in 2012-2013, I contacted the Australian Academy of Science requesting disclosure statements for people associated with the science of immunisation, persisting for 2 years on this matter, which the Academy seemed reluctant to address. The Australian Academy of Science has now finally published a disclosure register, but with inadequate information. I've mentioned how vaccine expenditure has risen dramatically in Australia. This is a worldwide phenomenon, with the global vaccine market predicted to rise from US $5.7 billion in 2002 to more than US $77.5 billion in 2024, a more than 13-fold increase. Pharmaceutical companies are now seeing vaccine products as a crucial path to market growth. A factor that is likely to have influenced this global deluge of vaccine products is the United States implementing a system in the mid-1980s to protect vaccine manufacturers from vaccine product liability. A number of organisations are facilitating the booming vaccine market for pharmaceutical companies. As you'd expect, the World Health Organization is heavily involved in promoting vaccine products and has a global vaccine action plan to deliver universal access to immunisation. The WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunisation, SAGE, is the principal advisory group to the WHO for vaccines and immunisation, advising the WHO on overall global policies and strategies. Members of SAGE include Terry Nolan, former chair of ATAGI, and Andrew Pollard, the current chair of the UK's Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Both of these people have been involved in the promotion of Meningococcal B vaccination and are in a position to influence global vaccination policy regarding this vaccine product. The foremost organisation supporting the Global Vaccine Action Plan is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This philanthropic foundation has been a major game changer in promoting the booming global vaccine market. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest philanthropic foundation in the world, with an endowment of US $42.9 billion as at 2015. The report, Philanthropic Power and Development, Who Shapes the Agenda, provides valuable critical analysis of the power and influence being exerted by the Gates Foundation, including in regards to international vaccination policy. This report is essential reading to understand the influence of powerful individuals on vaccination policy affecting us all. Bill and Melinda Gates have been involved in vaccine promotion since 1998, with the creation of their children's vaccine program, and subsequently supported meetings that led to the creation of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation, that's Gavi, which works with vaccine manufacturers. The Gates Foundation sees vaccines as a quick-win solution to global health challenges, and with their donations of billions of dollars to this cause, have become the dominant player in setting the international vaccination agenda, with the WHO and others to do their bidding. While many would see the Gates fervour for vaccination as a laudable pursuit, it should also be considered if the Gates Foundation's emphasis on vaccine solutions for multiple health problems is undermining other more holistic approaches to health policy. With the Gates Foundation being firmly wedded to vaccination ideology as a magic bullet for the world's ills, would any insiders have the courage to broach potential problems with repeated revaccination throughout life? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is wielding its influence via a wide range of organisations. Now, even the supposedly independent evidence-based medicine Cochrane Group has joined this gravy train and accepted funding from the Gates Foundation. Cochrane promises to gather and summarise the best health evidence from research to help you make informed choices about treatment. But can we trust Cochrane to objectively review data on vaccination with their Gates connection? The World Mercury Project provides a critique of Cochrane in the article, "Are Cochrane Reviews Truly Independent and Transparent?" Cochrane has other conflicts of interest, including the stifling of criticism of a review on aluminium and vaccine safety prepared by Cochrane authors published in 2004. This review promoted aluminium adjuvanted vaccines as being safe, despite being based on data of low methodological quality. Despite a lack of good quality evidence, these Cochrane authors unaccountably recommended that no further research be undertaken on this topic. Cochrane remain under challenge from me for their far-reaching effects of this poor quality review, as detailed on my website. Other powerful individuals influencing vaccination policy are members of the Murdoch family. The international Murdoch media group, now known as News Corp and headed by Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch, pursued a relentless media campaign for over 2 years in its Australian newspapers, such as the Daily Telegraph and the Herald Sun and others, demanding no jab, no play. This campaign was obligingly adopted as policy by then Prime Minister Tony Abbott, with cross-party support from Bill Shorten and Greens leader Richard Di Natale. Richard Di Natale played an influential and biased role in the Senate hearing on the No Jab, No Pay bill, which should be subject to investigation, as should the involvement of the coercive vaccination lobby groups, Friends of Science in Medicine and SAVN, which were represented by Sue Araki, David Hawkes, John Cunningham and Patrick Stokes. Following the farce of the Senate hearing, the No Jab, No Pay law was enacted in January 2016 under Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister. While running their No Jab, No Play campaign, the Murdoch media group did not clearly disclose their conflict of interest in this matter. That is, the Murdoch family's involvement in vaccine research and development via the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, founded by Rupert Murdoch's mother, Dame Elizabeth Murdoch. Lachlan Murdoch's wife, Sarah Murdoch, has been on the Murdoch Children's Research Institute Board of Directors since 2014 and has been the organisation's ambassador since 2000. Former ATAGI chair and WHO SAGE member Terry Nolan is now employed by the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, where he is involved with research funded by GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Novartis, Sanofi Pasteur and Novavax. The National Immunization Conference, regularly held by the Public Health Association of Australia, illustrates the cosy relationships between federal and state governments, policy influencers such as the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance, and the vaccine industry, for example, GlaxoSmithKline, CSL companies Seqirus, Pfizer and Sanofi Pasteur. The Australian Government Department of Health was the principal sponsor of this conference, recently held in Adelaide, showcasing vaccine products, including the GlaxoSmithKline Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine. The South Australian Government was also a principal partner. Australian Health Minister Greg Hunt gave the opening address for this conference, with keynote speakers including the Australian Government's Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, along with many other speakers from the conflicted network of academics influencing vaccination policy. In this regard, I suggest you read Associate Professor of International Criminology, Paddy Rawlinson's essay, Immunity and Impunity, Corruption in the State-Pharma Nexus, which discusses the mandating of vaccine products in direct violation of the principle of informed consent and the undermining of free speech on this matter. As mentioned previously, the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance's Robert Bowie is also a director and scientific advisory member of the industry-funded Immunisation Coalition, a significant part of the network influencing taxpayer-funded vaccination policy in Australia, being sponsored and supported by GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, CSL company Seqirus, Sanofi Pasteur, Roche and others, including Google. Members of the Immunisation Coalition, particularly Robert Bowie, are often quoted in mainstream media articles supporting vaccine products, without clear disclosure that this is an industry-funded body. There's actually a vast network defending the status quo on vaccination. This slide shows what we're up against. Citizens concerned about vaccination policy are being suppressed by this network, which labels them anti-vaxxers and shuts down debate. For example, the university and government-funded The Conversation website publishes articles relevant to vaccination policy and censors citizens who question these articles. The Conversation also supports members of the coercive vaccination lobby groups, Friends of Science in Medicine and SAVN. That is Sue Iraqi, David Hawkes, Rachel Dunlop and Patrick Stokes. The Australian Medical Association and the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, AHPRA, also protect the status quo for the vaccine industry, aided and abetted by doctor websites such as Medical Observer and MJA Insight. And of course, the mainstream media provides biased coverage on vaccination policy, led by the Murdoch Media Group, which is conflicted by the Murdoch Families Association with the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. The taxpayer-funded ABC and SBS have been particularly negligent in failing to provide critical analysis of taxpayer-funded vaccination policy. Right now, yet another vaccine product is being pushed for the national schedule, the GlaxoSmithKline Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine. This vaccine has already been rejected 3 times for the taxpayer-funded schedule due to multiple uncertainties, which raises the question, on what evidence did the TGA approve and register this uncertain product? Meningococcal bacteria is largely quite harmless and only rarely a serious matter. And this is interesting. Why are serious meningococcal cases so rare? This is what independent immunologists should be investigating to develop our knowledge of the human immune system. Despite the rarity of serious meningococcal B, the South Australian government is considering implementing mass vaccination of children, thereby ignoring the federal government's PBAC evaluation process. The Medical Observer website for doctors has published articles calling for the addition of the Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine to the taxpayer-funded schedule, citing Robert Bowie and Terry Nolan's support of this vaccine product. Robert Bowie referred to the UK adding the vaccine to its childhood schedule to justify adding it in Australia, but failed to reveal the Bexsero vaccine product was also originally rejected in the UK. A decision that was overturned after intensive lobbying by vested interests and when a person involved with the development of the Bexsero vaccine product, Andrew Pollard, became chair of the UK's Committee Approving Vaccine Products, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Another blatant example of conflict of interest. In South Australia, a Bexsero Meningococcal B vaccine trial funded by GlaxoSmithKline is underway, involving up to 60,000 students. An article published in the Murdoch Advertiser newspaper says, it is hoped the findings will provide a strong push to get the vaccine on the taxpayer-funded National Immunisation Programme. A TAGI member, Helen Marshall, is the lead investigator on this GlaxoSmithKline-funded trial, which appears to be biased from the outset. Given her role on ATAGI, Helen Marshall has a serious conflict of interest. A TV advertisement urging students to participate in this trial says, help protect yourself while also protecting your family and friends. I suggest these students are being misled about the effectiveness of this still uncertain vaccine product. It is notable that both Robert Bowie and Helen Marshall are members of the coercive vaccination lobby group Friends of Science in Medicine, which was influential at the Senate hearing where the No Jab, No Pay bill. Could meningococcal vaccination create more problems with the evolution of new strains? Dr. Norman Swan asked this question when discussing meningococcal W on the ABC's Health Report in January 2017. It's notable that after a media campaign in Victoria and Western Australia, the PBAC has fast-tracked approval for the Pfizer Nimenrix ACWY meningococcal vaccine for the National Taxpayer-Funded Schedule based on a ATAGI advice. This vaccine product will be on the schedule from July 2018. So where are we going with this? Working our way through the meningococcal alphabet? And there's some information there about the people I've been talking about you can look at online. And so I'll just conclude. Where are we headed with this ever-increasing number of vaccines and revaccinations? Is it feasible to vaccinate against every ailment, including rare diseases such as meningococcal B? What does the future hold for highly vaccinated populations? Will future generations be made dependent on vaccine products, with natural immunity being destroyed? What does the future hold with pharmaceutical companies and governments controlling immunity? What about the vaccine failures that are now emerging, for example, pertussis, whooping cough, and problems with other vaccines? There are parallels to consider with the emerging problems from the overuse of antibiotics and overprescribing of other medical products such as opioids and antidepressants. We need independent, big-picture thinkers to consider the frightening possibilities with the overuse of vaccines. Instead, vaccination policy is dominated by big pharma and academics on the teat of industry research funding. Vaccination policy is a shambles, awash with conflicts of interest. The vaccine industry is driving vaccination policy in their quest to develop lucrative vaccine markets. There must be an independent and objective review of the burgeoning and conflicted taxpayer-funded vaccination schedule. Citizens must demand transparency and accountability for vaccination policy from the governments that are supposed to serve us. Thank you.